I know that this book was right up my alley because I looked at the cover of the book, and you have Christian Laettner. And I'm not, that documentary was great, the I Hate Laettner documentary, but I'm like Switzerland, and I believe like you, where, you're in that sports world, and you just remember the events, not necessarily that you're taking a side. That was one of the ones where I was actually there, Eric, because that game was at the Spectrum in Philadelphia.
Sure,
but we'll get into that a little bit more. First and foremost, your background, and I know this is the second book that you've written. This is sort of an extension. The first one was Being There. 100 Sports Pros talk about the best sporting events they ever witnessed firsthand. That book coming out in 2007. Well, now this is the broadcasters and the journalists talking about the events. So sort of a natural progression, but maybe talk a little bit about your background and how you're now the author of not one, but two very cool sports books.
Well, I never set out to be an author. That's the funny part about all of this is that, I'm in the editorial side of things, but I'm not really a columnist or a writer or a reporter or anything like that. I'm more of a behind the scenes guy. But it was just one of those things, going back to the book in 2007, where I was playing around with a website and trying out some different ideas, and it's a topic that you can share with friends, whether they work in sports or they don't work in sports, and it just struck the right chord, and people started talking about it that I'm friends with in press rooms, and some of the lists that were coming out, a friend of mine was talking to Dave Anderson from the New York Times, and he started rattling off the 1955 World Series and Super Bowl III and Secretariat and the Ali fights, and my buddy came back to me and said, if you get the right people involved, you've got a pretty good topic, you've got an idea here that could really work, and we just kind of went with it. And the next thing you know, the book came out in 2007, and it was time to do another one and bring it all up to date and get some new people involved.
Yeah, and there's 65 participants in this book. And again, the book is called I Was There. Joe Buck, Bob Costas, Jim Nantz, and others relive the most exciting sports events of their lives. We're talking with the author, Eric Mirlis, here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. But 65 guys, you think, boy, that's a lot of interviews you have to do. And you actually, I'm guessing, Eric, probably had to leave some stories out.
Yeah, I actually interviewed 100 people. That was the original plan, was to do 100 people again. And as we were getting it on paper and I was transcribing all of the interviews, I interviewed all 100, and it was just getting too long. And my publishers and my editors were like, you're going to have to cut some stuff down here. There were some people that wanted to include a sixth story. In some cases, I was able to combine two events into one story. But yeah, there were a lot of decisions that had to be made and a lot of cutting down and a lot of tough choices. But at the end of the day, I think I got the right mix of people and events and the eras involved.
And of course, I keep reading off the big names because they're on the cover of the book. People know the Joe Bucks, the Bob Costas of the world. I'm a big hockey guy. My eyes lit up when I got to the M's and I see Jiggs McDonald. I mean, yeah. Not everybody knows who Jiggs McDonald is, but he was a pretty legendary broadcaster.
And Bob Miller right behind him. So you have two Hall of Famers there who have been in the hockey business for, Jiggs just celebrated his 50th anniversary, and Bob's been around just about as long as Jiggs has. So, you go back and you get, again, as many different sports and as many different ideas and as many different eras as possible, and then you compare and contrast their stories when people start telling the same event. You look at them from completely different angles in a lot of cases.
Well, tell us a few of the stories that really raised your eyebrow, because certainly you had many that you did listen to and kind of, and they're putting their five together. What were some of the ones that you were like, holy cow, I never heard that?
There are two that have always stood out to me that I love talking about. One is from Terry Gannon, who played, obviously, in one of the all-time great college basketball games, the NC State-Houston game. But we disqualified that because he played in it. I wanted stuff he saw in person. And then he turns around and tells me that he grew up with Rudy Rudiger and was at the Notre Dame-Georgia Tech game that's depicted in the movie Rudy.
Wow.
And I started hearing the story and how he was there, and he actually has Rudy's helmet from the game, and just sat back and soaked it all in and said to myself, all right, I've got something here. Now I've got one of those stories that people are going to say, wow, that's really cool, just like you did. The other story that I thought was just as much fun to hear is from Jeremy Schaap, whose father, Dick, is one of the legends in sports broadcasting and writing, especially in New York. And when Jeremy was a kid, Dick took him up in 1978 to Fenway Park for the one-game playoff between the Yankees and Red Sox. And we all know that, of course, now as the Bucky Dent game. Mm-hmm. Well, Jeremy wasn't old enough to sit in the press box, and they had to find a pair of tickets. So his dad was walking around on the field asking players who was using their seats and who wasn't. And they ended up sitting in Bucky Dent's seats for that game.
Oh, my gosh, that's fantastic.
So I thought that was another one where I said, wow, that's neat. I just got something really cool. And there are plenty of others, but those are the two that they've always stood out to me. I love that it's events that we know. One we know because of how famous the moment is, and the other we know from a movie. And now it's a completely different spin on those two. And that's what I was really trying to go after.
Now, I'm a geek for those 30 for 30s, and I'll bring that Bucky Dent thing back in just a second. But while you're talking about spin and historic moments, I know that there's an article somewhere out there about that was the first game that the replays of home runs and different angles and being able to get 6 or 7 cutaways, because of course television and pictures tell a story in a way that all other forms of media can't. To the Bucky Dent reference that I was hinting at, I will say that you didn't say it the way that the Boston people would say it, which is Bucky effing Dent, right?
Exactly. Well, that's the New Yorker in me there.
And then here's the fun. So I'm on the phone. You and I have never met. We've never talked before. I get this email, hey, you should interview this author. He's a pretty nice guy. I covered the Omaha Royals / Omaha Golden Spikes during my time in Nebraska.
Okay.
You bring up Bucky Dent. Well, I was given the bobblehead doll, a Bucky Dent bobblehead doll by Bucky effing Dent. When he was the manager there. And, of course, he was in Omaha because Steinbrenner of the Yankees had kind of made him an afterthought and weren't pushing him. He wanted to find a path to become a major league manager, and he thought the best way to do that was with a bad franchise. And, of course, in the time I was in Omaha, the Royals were really, really bad. So that's how my path happens to cross with Bucky effing Dent. I just keep trying to slip that in as much as I can. We're talking to Eric Mirlis. He's the author of I Was There. Joe Buck, Bob Costas, Jim Nantz, and others relive their most exciting sporting events of their lives. You can pick up that book right now. Also, he has a previous book out that he wrote, Being There, 100 Sports Pros talk about the best sporting events that they ever witnessed firsthand. Well, I'll try, very humbly, sir, to give you a few of mine. I hinted at Christian Laettner, the Duke versus Kentucky game. That was one for me because I was at Temple University, and Temple was the host school, the site manager, if you will, and my guy Al Schreier, who's been around forever. God bless Mr. Schreier. I think at that point I had written for the Temple News. Perhaps I was doing a little bit of work at that point for WRTI radio, but Al gave me a press pass, and I wasn't really working. I didn't do work.
Of course.
But boy, I sure got to be there to see Christian Laettner break Kentucky's heart. The one I definitely know I was working for was sitting in the auxiliary press box at the Sky Dome the next year in '93 when Joe Carter hit the walk-off home run to win the World Series for the Toronto Blue Jays. And, of course, as we refer to it here, Mitch threw the pitch.
And, look, as you just inferred, just because your team lost doesn't mean it can't be a memorable event. You know when you're seeing history. You know when you're seeing something special. Game 7 of the World Series this year, even if you weren't a fan of either of those two teams, you knew you were seeing something special. And you get a lot of that comes through because, people, everyone in the book is a sports fan, and that's why they're all in this business, and that's why they're doing what they do. But it comes through in a lot of cases that they're fans, and they appreciate all of these great things that they're seeing. And it's easy to forget that when you're watching it on TV and you're hearing Joe Buck. Everyone likes to get on him about being against this team or against that team. And we all know that's really not true. He's there to call the game and paint that picture for everybody. But you also know that when you're seeing something special and he's calling something special, he understands that and appreciates that as much as everybody.
Eric Mirlis is with us. He's the author of I Was There. Joe Buck, Bob Costas, Jim Nantz, and others relive the most most exciting sporting events of their lives. My drop-off, by the way, Eric, after those top two are pretty hard to beat. It slides down real fast. I just, as I tried to prepare a list of 5 for you, I thought, well, Nebraska winning their national championship, the first ever to beat Miami at the Orange Bowl, and Tom Osborne, I was on the field for that because I worked for a Nebraska TV station at that time, and then they followed that up by just absolutely destroying Florida at the Fiesta Bowl in Phoenix the following year. So those back-to-back national championships go in my top five, although with a grace mark of the fact that I stood next to Darius Rucker from Hootie and the Blowfish when the final seconds were winding down at that Fiesta Bowl in Arizona. So, I don't know that my list would make it in your book, but
those two up at the top are so iconic that it's hard to have as many events as you can that are as big as that. Those two are just enormous, the first two that you talk about.
And you talked about a couple of the authors. Then, was there anybody that was hard to track down? Was there anybody that was like, or were they all willing to just open up the vault, so to speak, and give you their best?
They were all very willing. I've been very lucky in my career to have worked behind the scenes for a while and have gotten to know some of these broadcasters and writers, and in a lot of other cases have become friends with producers and PR people. So there were a lot of people willing to make introductions. And when I got the right person to make the introduction to the right person, someone like Bob Costas was very willing to open up. And Joe Buck, I was working at Fox at the time, so he obviously in that case was also very willing to open up and share some of these stories. And again, they bring emotion in, and I encouraged everybody to be as personal with their list as possible because I knew we were going to have a lot of Super Bowls and we were going to have a lot of World Series. So I was hoping, and in a lot of cases I got, stuff from their childhoods or, something that they were at as a fan that kind of went off the beaten path a bit. To get away from those Super Bowls because those, in a lot of cases, are just as important to each of these broadcasters as all of those Super Bowls.
And that's true. In the write-up, it says Super Bowl, World Series, Olympics, of course. Those would be in a lot of top five sports moments. But the credo is whether you're a Yankees fan or Red Sox Nation or diehard Packers fan or Cowboys fan or Kentucky Wildcats or Louisville Cardinals, whoever you root for, there's a story in this book for you. I looked through some of the author names that you have that you talked to, or some of the participants, I should say, that you spoke to, and you see Jerry Eisenberg's name jump out, a legendary scribe. You see Frank DeFord's name jump out. These are the names that jump out to me as a guy that did. My path was newspaper first, radio second, television third, and now back to radio fourth. And, of course, the path's still going. But we're spending a few minutes here with Eric Mirlis. He is the author of I Was There, Joe Buck, Bob Costas, Jim Nantz, and others relive the most exciting sports events of their lives. So I gave you a couple of mine, Eric. What are your five?
Well, my first, and again, as I said to everybody, I encourage everybody to make it personal. I grew up on Long Island as an Islander fan. And my first job out of college was also with the Islanders. So I got to live that dream of working for the team that you grew up rooting for. And I worked there in 1993 when the Islanders played the Pittsburgh Penguins in the playoffs in the second round. And those were the Penguin teams with Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr and all of those Hall of Famers. And the Islanders weren't expected to win a single game in the second round, let alone end up going on and winning Game 7 in overtime in Pittsburgh to advance to the conference finals. So as an Islander fan growing up and then working for the organization and then being in the building for what at that time, and I believe still point-wise is the biggest upset in NHL history, was obviously a very special night and a very memorable night for myself. I've been lucky enough to be, I was at the John Starks dunk over Michael Jordan, the Michael Jordan 55-point game right after he came out of retirement. I was lucky enough to sit courtside for that. I used to do stats for Knick games at Madison Square Garden, so I had a pretty upfront view for those two games. And then one that I like to talk about, again, going off the beaten path. I was covering the Olympics in Athens in 2004. And went to heavyweight weightlifting just as a lark. I had the evening off and wanted to see some different events and ended up seeing what I did not realize at the time was the Michael Jordan of Greece was a heavyweight weightlifter who had announced he was retiring when the games were over. His name was Pyros Dimas, and he came out and did his lifts, and if he had completed his last lift, would have won the gold medal. He wasn't expected to medal. He ended up with the bronze. And when he came out for the medal ceremony, he had taken his shoes off and left them on the podium for his retirement. But when he came out for the medal ceremony, the place just lost it. And everybody was crying and singing and dancing. And it took them a good 15 minutes to get the medal ceremony started because the crowd was just so into it. And he brought his kids up onto the podium with him. And it was just such an emotional moment. And again, it's off the beaten path. And it's something that everybody in the United States probably didn't know happened. And if they did, it was because NBC quickly showed something about it. But to be in the building for something as emotional as that ranks up there with anything that I've seen in North America, simply because you can't make up that kind of atmosphere. You just can't. It doesn't happen naturally. It doesn't happen any way but organically. It just pops in there.
He's been at FS1, CBS, NBA, the New York Islanders, and now he's been on the Sports Bash with me here on 97.3 ESPN. His name is Eric Mirlis. He's the author of the book, I Was There. You can follow him on Twitter at The Merle if you'd like to follow him there. And, Eric, I really enjoyed the time and enjoyed visiting with you. Thanks so much.
Pete, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.